Their first reaction isn't heartbreak, it's relief, and that single truth is the hook that keeps viewers locked in, because it destroys the fantasy people cling to after rejection. Most people believe, if I mattered, they would hurt right away. They believe love is proven by immediate grief. They believe if someone walks away calmly, it means they never cared. And when an avoidant leaves you, their calmness can feel cruel. It can feel like you were disposable. It can feel like your love meant nothing. That's why this keynote is so powerful. It doesn't just explain their behavior, it frees the viewer from self-blame. Ladies and gentlemen, for an avoidant, closeness is not only comfort, closeness is threat. Intimacy doesn't just feel warm, it feels exposing. It feels like expectations, it feels like responsibility, it feels like being needed. And if their nervous system equates being needed with losing control, then love can feel like pressure even when you are gentle. So when they finally create distance, their body experiences a rush of relief. Not because you were wrong, but because the alarm inside them got quieter. This is why avoidants can leave and look fine. Their nervous system is experiencing regulation through distance. Distance gives them the illusion of safety. Their mind starts telling a story to match the feeling. I needed space. I was overwhelmed. This wasn't right. I'm better alone. They convince themselves it's freedom because freedom sounds noble. But what it often is the removal of emotional intensity they couldn't manage. And this is where the viewer usually gets trapped. They see the relief and they panic. They interpret the avoidance calmness as proof they don't matter. So they chase, they plead, they send paragraphs. They try to pull emotions out of someone whose system is designed to shut emotions down. The viewer thinks, if I just make them feel something, they'll come back. But all that pursuit does is confirm the avoidance fear. See, closeness equals pressure. It reinforces the very pattern that made them run. So the keynote begins by validating what the viewer is seeing. Yes, they look relieved. Yes, they look lighter. Yes, they might even appear happier. But then it reframes it. That relief is not a victory, it's a coping mechanism. It's a nervous system reward for escaping vulnerability. It's the same kind of relief someone feels when they avoid a difficult conversation. You feel better for a moment, but you didn't solve the problem, you just postponed it. That's why we call it the relief high. It's real, it's immediate, and it's temporary. Because relief isn't the same as healing, and relief isn't the same as happiness. Relief is what you feel when you stop facing something. Happiness is what you feel when you've built something stable. An avoidance relief comes from removing the emotional mirror you provided. Because being with someone who loves deeply can force them to face parts of themselves they've been running from, their inconsistency, their fear of intimacy, their fear of being truly seen. So they leave and the pressure of being seen disappears. Of course they feel relief. But here's the part the avoidant didn't expect, the part that turns the story. The relief high fades when the nervous system settles, when life gets quiet, when the distractions run out, when the brain stops being flooded by freedom and starts noticing the absence. And the absence isn't just of you. It's the absence of the emotional regulation you provided. The absence of someone who cared. The absence of someone who noticed. The absence of someone who made them feel grounded even when they didn't deserve it. And that's why their pain is delayed, not non-existent. Avoidants tend to process love in reverse. They feel the fear first, then the longing later. They feel the pressure first, then the loss later. That doesn't mean they loved you better than anyone else. It means their system is wired to protect them first and grieve second. So the viewer must understand this. The avoidance relief doesn't mean you weren't valuable. It means the dynamic was emotionally intense, and intensity triggers their defenses. If you were a deep person, if you required real connection, if you wanted clarity, if you wanted consistency, you were not easy to keep at a comfortable distance. You made intimacy real. And for an avoidant, real intimacy is the thing they crave and fear at the same time. This keynote also delivers a crucial warning. Do not let their relief bait you into chasing. When you see them, fine, you'll want to prove your worth. You'll want to remind them what they lost. You'll want to force a reaction so you can feel chosen again. But the most powerful response to an avoidance relief phase is not performance. It's composure. Because your composure does two things. It protects your nervous system from becoming addicted to their approval. And it prevents you from reinforcing their fear that closeness equals chaos. And that's why this keynote keeps viewers to the end. It plants the question, if they feel relief now, what happens when the relief wears off? It creates suspense in a truthful way. It sets up the next phases, the quiet, the emptiness, the comparisons, the testing. But most importantly, it gives the viewer dignity. It tells them stop reading their relief as rejection of your worth. Read it as evidence of their coping style. Because if someone has to run to feel safe, They are not rejecting you as a person, they are escaping emotional exposure. And if you keep chasing during their relief high, you become the proof they were right to run. But if you stay grounded, if you stop trying to be chosen through desperation, you let the cycle reveal itself. Either they grow and return with accountability, or they fade away and you finally stop bleeding for a connection that only existed when you were the one doing all the emotional work. They didn't escape you. They escaped exposure, and this keynote is the moment the viewer stops personalizing the breakup and starts understanding the avoidant's internal war. Because the viewer usually thinks the avoidant left for one simple reason: I wasn't enough. They assume the avoidant left because they didn't love them, didn't value them, didn't care. But avoidant psychology is often more twisted than that. They can leave precisely because they cared, because caring raises the stakes, and high stakes activate the very thing they fear most: being seen and being responsible. Ladies and gentlemen, exposure is not just vulnerability. Exposure is intimacy. It's the experience of someone being close enough to notice your patterns, close enough to notice your mood shifts, close enough to notice when you're pulling away, when you're pretending, when you're hiding. Exposure is someone seeing through the mask you built to survive. And for many avoidants, that mask is everything. The mask is competence, independence, control. I'm fine. I don't need anyone. The mask protects them from shame. The mask protects them from the fear that if someone sees their need, they will be rejected. So when they get into a relationship with someone who is emotionally present, someone who asks real questions, someone who wants closeness, the mask starts cracking. And when the mask cracks, they don't feel excited, they feel threatened. They feel the old story rising: if I let someone in, I will lose myself. If I need them, I will be trapped. If they see the real me, they will leave. That story can come from childhood, from inconsistent caregiving, from emotional neglect, from being shamed for feelings, from growing up having to be the strong one. Whatever the source, the result is the same: intimacy feels unsafe. That's why avoidants often behave in a confusing way. They get close, then they pull away. They open up, then they shut down. They flirt with the future, then they disappear. It's not always because you did something wrong. It's because closeness activates exposure, and exposure activates fear. The closer you get, the more their nervous system screams, this is dangerous. So they do the thing that has always protected them: they create distance. And here's the part the viewer needs to hear clearly. They didn't leave because you were too much. They left because what you asked for required emotional adulthood. Consistency requires effort. Communication requires vulnerability. Repair requires accountability. And accountability is the thing many avoidants fear because it forces them to face their impact. It forces them to admit, I hurt you. It forces them to feel guilt. It forces them to feel shame. So instead of staying and facing exposure, they leave and call it freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, when they leave, they usually tell themselves a story that makes them feel powerful. I wasn't right. It was too intense. I lost myself. I need to focus on me. Sometimes they even make you the villain in their mind. They label you needy, emotional, demanding, controlling, not necessarily because you were those things, but because labeling you that way reduces their guilt. It turns escape into self-care. It turns avoidance into righteousness. It allows them to leave without feeling like the bad person. But underneath that story is often something else, a deep fear of being truly known. Because being truly known means someone can truly judge you. Someone can truly abandon you. Someone can see your flaws up close. Someone can need you. Someone can expect you. Someone can ask you to grow. And if an avoidant never developed the skills to handle that, the safest thing is to run. This keynote also explains why avoidants sometimes leave right when things are getting real. Right when you start asking for commitment. Right when you start wanting clarity. Right when you start building deeper connection. Because the moment the relationship moves from emotion to structure, their nervous system feels trapped. Structure means responsibility. Structure means expectations. Structure means you can't hide anymore. And that's exposure. So what thought they'd be happier without you really means is they thought they'd be safer without exposure. They thought without you there would be less pressure to show up emotionally, less pressure to communicate, less pressure to be consistent, less pressure to face their own patterns. And in the short term, they're right, they do feel safer. But safety built on avoidance becomes loneliness, because the cost of avoiding exposure is avoiding intimacy. And that's the turning point that sets up the next keynotes. Because once the initial relief fades, once distractions lose their power, the avoidant starts to feel the emptiness, not because they suddenly become healthy, but because you represented something they can't easily replace, an emotional home they didn't know how to maintain. Now, the viewer's role in this is crucial. If you chase them during this stage, You confirm their narrative that closeness equals pressure. You become the proof that they were right to run. But if you stay grounded, if you stop pleading, if you stop performing love as desperation, you do something powerful. You allow them to sit in the consequence of their escape. You allow their nervous system to feel what it avoided: loss. And that's when the avoidant is forced to confront the truth. They didn't escape a problem, they escaped intimacy. They didn't leave because you were wrong, they left because exposure felt like danger. So this keynote keeps viewers engaged because it's a painful but liberating truth. You weren't rejected because you weren't valuable. You were rejected because you were real. And real love requires courage. And some avoidants would rather feel free than be seen. Distraction has an expiration date, and when life gets quiet, you return as a feeling. And this keynote is what makes the viewer lean in, because it explains the delayed impact that avoidants never expect. The viewer is usually watching this video from the most painful place. The place where they're still hurting while the avoidant seems fine. They're crying while the avoidant is posting. They're processing while the avoidant is busy. They're replaying memories while the avoidant is laughing with friends. And the viewer thinks, how can they move on so fast? This keynote answers that question without false hope, and it does it in a way that makes the viewer stay, because it promises the real timeline of what happens after the relief high. Ladies and gentlemen, avoidants are often masters of staying occupied. Not because they're thriving, but because they're escaping. Business is not always productivity. Sometimes it's anesthesia. A full schedule can be a way to avoid feelings. A new hobby can be a way to avoid grief. A new connection can be a way to avoid loneliness. They keep motion going because motion prevents emotion. When the body is moving, the mind doesn't have to sit still long enough to feel what it's been avoiding. So in the first phase after leaving you, they distract. They lean into work, friends, gym, travel, scrolling, flirting, anything that keeps the nervous system from becoming quiet. They tell themselves they're doing great. They build a narrative of freedom and relief. And in that phase, you can look like the one who lost. You can look like the one still attached. You can feel like you're the only person who cared. But here's the truth: distraction is not processing. Distraction is borrowing relief from the future. Because the feeling doesn't disappear, it waits. You can outrun your emotions for a while, but you can't outrun them forever. Eventually something slows down. A weekend comes with no plans. A night comes when nobody is available. The newness fades, the dopamine drops, the noise quiets, and then the avoidant has to sit with themselves. That moment is where, then this happened. Because you return not as a thought they choose, but as a feeling that arrives. A smell, a street, a random phrase, an old photo, a quiet moment in the car. And suddenly their chest tightens. They feel restless. They feel irritated. They feel a strange emptiness they can't name. They might not even say, "I miss you." They might just feel off. That's because avoidants often experience grief sideways. Their system is trained to suppress emotions, so feelings often show up as agitation, numbness, anger, anxiety, boredom. They don't always recognize it as longing, but it is. And what do they miss in that moment? Not only you, but the emotional regulation you provided. They miss the warmth they could lean against without admitting they needed it. They miss being known, even if they fought it. They miss the feeling of being important to someone. They miss the stability of your care. Because for many avoidants, you are the quiet anchor they didn't appreciate until the anchor is gone. This keynote is powerful because it explains why avoidants can look happy publicly but still feel empty privately. Public happiness is easy. Private silence is honest. And avoidants often win at public performance. They can appear unbothered. But in the quiet, the internal questions start: was that a mistake? Did I overact? Why does everything feel less meaningful? They start comparing experiences, not because the new things are bad, but because the new things don't touch the deeper part of them the way you did. Ladies and gentlemen, here's where the viewer needs to be careful. The avoidance delayed sadness does not automatically mean they're ready to be different. Missing you is not the same as being capable of relationship. Longing is not the same as accountability. Many avoidants miss the comfort you provided, but still fear the responsibility of intimacy. So they can feel sad and still avoid repair. They can feel regret and still not apologize. They can miss you and still not be ready. That's why this keynote isn't here to sell the viewer a fantasy that they'll definitely come back. It's here to give the viewer a better question. Not, will they miss me? They will. Almost anyone misses genuine love once the noise dies down. The better question is, what will they do with the feeling? Will they use it as a wake-up call to grow, or will they use it as a reason to test you for reassurance and then disappear again? And that is the suspense that keeps viewers watching. Because if distraction expires, the next stage is inevitable. Either they face the loss with maturity, or they reach out in a way that is only meant to soothe their loneliness. This keynote sets up the next phase perfectly, the return attempt. The breadcrumb, the test. Because once you return as a feeling, the avoidant wants relief, and the quickest relief is contact with you. So the message for the viewer is this. Don't let their early distraction make you feel worthless. It's not proof you didn't matter, it's proof they're avoiding feeling. And don't let their late sadness make you abandon your standards. Sadness is not a commitment. Sadness is a feeling. If they come back, measure behavior, not emotion. Because when the noise ends, the truth arrives. And the truth is, you don't just vanish from an avoidant's life. You echo. You show up in their quiet. You show up in their empty moments. You show up when distractions fail. And that's when they finally understand what they thought they'd be happier without. Easy isn't always safe. Sometimes it's just shallow enough to avoid intimacy. And this keynote keeps viewers hooked because it exposes the hidden comparison phase that most avoidants never admit. The viewer thinks the avoidant moved on because someone else was better. That's the wound. That's the story that destroys self-esteem. They found someone prettier. They found someone calmer. They found someone less emotional. They found someone who fits them. And then the viewer starts competing with a ghost. They start trying to become easier to keep. They shrink their needs, soften their voice, hold back their feelings, all in the hope that one day the avoidant will choose them over the new person. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the trap, because the avoidant doesn't always choose what is deep. They often choose what is manageable. They choose what doesn't activate their fear. They choose what doesn't require them to grow. They choose what doesn't threaten the identity they built around independence. And that choice can look like happiness. It can look like peace. But many times it's not true peace, it's just low activation. It's a relationship that doesn't stir the deep places, because stirring the deep places is what intimacy does. So when the avoidant steps into something easy, it often feels calmer, less conflict, less emotional conversation, less accountability, less expectation. It's like turning down the volume on life. And for an avoidant nervous system, low volume equals safety. That's why they can look like they're thriving. That's why it looks like they upgraded. But the viewer needs to understand calm is not always connection. Calm can be avoidance. And this is where comparison begins. Because after a while, the avoidant realizes something they didn't anticipate. Easy comes with emptiness. Easy comes with shallowness. Easy comes with surface, level comfort that doesn't nourish the deeper parts of them. They might laugh, but it doesn't land the same. They might date, but it doesn't touch the same nerve. They might get attention, but it doesn't feel like being known. Because you didn't just give them company, you gave them depth. You gave them emotional truth. You saw them. Ladies and gentlemen, being seen is intoxicating to an avoidant and terrifying at the same time. That's why they ran, but that's also why they compare. Because deep down, they remember how it felt when someone understood them without them having to perform. They remember the safety of being known. And when they enter something shallow, they feel a strange hollowness they can't name. So they start scanning. They start comparing the way the new person reacts, the way the new person listens, the way the new person connects. And even if they don't admit it out loud, your imprint is in the background. Now, let's be clear. Comparison doesn't always mean regret. Sometimes it means discomfort. Sometimes it means they're noticing that easy doesn't solve the real problem, because the real problem wasn't you. The real problem was their capacity for intimacy. They thought changing people would fix the feeling. But the feeling follows them, because the feeling comes from inside them. It comes from the fear of closeness. It comes from the avoidance of vulnerability. So they swap partners and still feel emotionally restless. They still feel alone in certain moments. They still feel like something is missing. And that's when the mind starts doing what minds do. It reaches back toward the connection that felt the most real. This keynote is powerful because it validates what many viewers sense. They can feel that the avoidant's new life is not as perfect as it looks. They can sense that something is off. They can sense that the avoidant is performing happiness. And here's why: because avoidants often confuse peace with numbness. They confuse stability with low emotional demand. They confuse no conflict with connection. But a relationship with no conflict can sometimes be a relationship with no depth. Depth requires vulnerability. Depth requires honesty. Depth requires repair. And if those things are missing, the relationship feels easy and empty. So what does the viewer do with this information? First, they stop competing with easy. They stop trying to become less emotional, less deep, less human. Because the goal is not to be easy to abandon. The goal is to be with someone who has the capacity to stay. You don't want to be chosen because you require nothing. You want to be chosen because you're valued, and because the other person can meet the standard of intimacy. Second, the viewer learns to interpret easy correctly. Easy is often a sign that the avoidant found a dynamic where they don't have to be accountable. And that's not a win, that's a delay. Because eventually, the deeper needs of the human heart surface. Eventually, loneliness appears even in a relationship. Eventually, the avoidant realizes that avoiding intimacy doesn't create happiness, it creates a quiet kind of emptiness. And this is where the suspense builds. Because once comparison starts, the avoidant often tries to reopen the door to you. Not always with a full apology, often with a test, a breadcrumb, a hey, something small. Because they want to soothe the emptiness without facing the vulnerability of admitting they were wrong. So this keynote keeps viewers watching because it asks the real question. When they compare and reach out, will you hand them access like before, or will you require the one thing that separates easy attention from real love, accountability? They often leave thinking you'll still be there, and then your silence creates uncertainty, and this keynote is the moment that makes the viewer sit up, because it explains the exact trigger that flips the dynamic. Not because silence is a magic trick, but because silence removes the avoidant's biggest comfort, guaranteed access without responsibility. Many avoidants don't walk away with a clean ending. They keep the door half open. They avoid closure. They leave things vague. They say things like, I don't know, maybe later. I just need space. We'll see. And the reason is simple, vagueness protects them. Vagueness keeps you emotionally available while they stay emotionally protected. Ladies and gentlemen, an avoidant can tolerate leaving if they believe you're still accessible. They can tolerate distance if the option remains. Because the option is soothing. The option is control. The option means they can run from discomfort today and still return to warmth tomorrow. So they don't always leave because they're done with you. They leave because they want relief with a backup plan. And that's why they often act strangely confident after the breakup. Not confident because they're truly over you, but confident because they think you'll still respond. They've seen your patterns. They know you love deeply. They know you forgive. They know you explain. They know you check in. They know you struggle with cutting them off. And without even meaning to, you may have trained them that you will remain reachable even when they withdraw. So in their mind, the relationship isn't fully ending, it's just pausing. That's why your silence matters, not as revenge, as reality. When you go quiet in a clean, self-respecting way, you interrupt the story they were telling themselves. You interrupt the fantasy that you're still waiting. You remove the emotional safety net of your availability. And suddenly, the avoidant is forced to face something their system hates, uncertainty. Because uncertainty is the one thing you can't control with distance. At first, the avoidant might feel relief, good, no pressure. But then the relief turns into a question. Were they actually done? And that question changes everything because it activates the avoidant's attachment system. Many avoidants only feel attachment when they feel loss. They only feel the bond when they can't control the bond. They only feel urgency when they can't predict your behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, the brain becomes obsessed with what it can't predict. And your silence makes you unpredictable in the one way that matters. You are no longer guaranteed. You are no longer an emotional constant they can return to whenever they feel lonely or guilty or bored. You become a real consequence. So what do avoidants do when uncertainty rises? They rarely come in with a full apology immediately. That's too exposing. That's too vulnerable. Instead, they test the door. A story view, a random question, a meme, a soft check. In that lets them measure your availability without risking rejection. Because if you don't respond, they can tell themselves, I didn't really try. But if you respond warmly, they get relief. The option still exists. This keynote keeps viewers watching because it reveals the hidden structure behind no contact. It's not about making them suffer. It's about removing the rewards of inconsistency. It's about breaking the loop that trained both nervous systems. They withdraw, you pursue, they relax. When you don't pursue, they don't relax. They feel the discomfort you used to carry. Now, here's the part the viewer must understand so they don't sabotage themselves. Silence only creates uncertainty if it is backed by genuine self-respect. If you go silent but you're still watching their stories, posting for them, checking constantly, and then breaking silence impulsively, you're still predictable. Your nervous system is still chasing, and the avoidant can sense that the door is still open. So the silence doesn't shift anything, it just becomes another phase of the same cycle. But when your silence is real, when you stop performing, stop baiting, stop monitoring, stop chasing, something powerful happens. You stop being emotionally available on demand, and the avoidance brain starts scanning because the supply of your attention is no longer automatic. That's why they start hovering. That's why they start checking you. That's why they start feeling the loss they postponed. Ladies and gentlemen, the viewer should not confuse hovering with growth. Hovering is a reaction to uncertainty. It's the avoidant trying to regain control without doing the work. So the real question becomes, what will you do when they test? Because that's the moment that determines whether the dynamic changes or repeats. If you respond like the old you, over-warm, over-available, instantly back into emotional intimacy, you remove uncertainty, you soothe them. You restore control. And once control is restored, they drift again. But if you respond like the new you, calm, paced, structured, you keep the uncertainty in the right place. You force clarity. You can say something simple and adult. Good to hear from you. What are you reaching out for? Or, I'm open to a real conversation, but I'm not available for inconsistency. That response doesn't punish, it doesn't beg, it doesn't collapse. It simply requires intention. And that's the whole point of this keynote. Your silence isn't the weapon. Your standard is the weapon. Your silence is just the moment the standard becomes real. It's the moment you stop being the option they assumed they could keep. It's the moment the avoidant realizes they can't have the comfort of you without the responsibility of you. And once that realization happens, they either step up into maturity, or they disappear and reveal that what they wanted wasn't love, it was access. Not every reach out is regret, sometimes it's a test. And don't reward a breadcrumb with full access, and this keynote is the final payoff, because it protects the viewer from the most dangerous moment in the entire avoidant cycle, the moment the avoidant returns. Most people think the hard part is being left. But in avoidant dynamics, the hardest part is what happens after you start healing. The hard part is when you finally begin to detach, and then they reappear just enough to pull you back into hope. That is where people lose months, sometimes years, because they confuse contact with change. Ladies and gentlemen, when an avoidant reaches out after silence, it can look like destiny. It can feel like validation. It can feel like finally they realized. And the nervous system, especially the anxious one, wants to collapse into that feeling because it's relief. Relief is powerful. Relief is addictive. Your body has been holding tension, waiting, wondering, replaying, and a simple "hey" can make your whole system exhale. But relief is not proof of readiness. Relief is proof that a loop was triggered. So this keynote teaches the viewer to slow down at the exact moment they want to speed up. Because the avoidant's first reach out is often designed to measure one thing. Are you still available? They might miss you, yes. They might feel lonely, yes. They might feel guilt, yes. But missing you is not the same as choosing you. Missing you is a feeling. Choosing you is behavior. And an avoidant who is not ready will try to get the emotional comfort of you without the accountability of rebuilding. That's what a breadcrumb is. A breadcrumb is a low-risk ping. It's vague. It's casual. It avoids depth. It avoids responsibility. It avoids naming the past. It's a door tap, not a door opening. Hey, how are you? Just checking in. A meme. A story reaction. A random question. Something that allows them to enter your space without offering clarity. If you respond with full warmth, full access, full emotional intimacy, you have just told them, nothing has changed. I'm still here. You can come and go as you like. And once they feel that reassurance, the uncertainty disappears, and with it, the motivation to step up. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why so many people experience the same heartbreak twice. The avoidant returns. The avoidant relaxes. Then the avoidant pulls away again, and the viewer blames themselves. I should have been colder. I should have waited longer. I ruined it. No, you didn't ruin it. You just rewarded a test as if it were commitment. This keynote is about one core principle: access must match effort. If effort is small, access stays small. If intention is unclear, access stays structured. If repair is missing, intimacy does not resume. That's not being cruel. That's being wise. That's protecting the part of you that keeps getting bruised by the same cycle. So what should the viewer do when the reach out happens? They respond with calm structure that forces intention into the light. Not a long speech, not emotional dumping, not a fight, just a simple response that asks for clarity. Good to hear from you. What are you reaching out for? Or, I'm open to a real conversation. I'm not available for inconsistency. Those lines are powerful because they do two things. They keep your dignity intact, and they ask them to step out of vagueness. And then you watch the next move, because the next move reveals everything. A person who genuinely wants to rebuild will accept the structure. They will answer the question. They will become specific. They will acknowledge the past. They will be willing to talk about what changed. They will be willing to hear your needs without punishing you. They might be nervous, but they will stay present. They will not demand immediate emotional access as the price of their return. A person who is only testing will dodge. They will keep it light. They will act offended. They will say, "Why are you making it a big deal? I was just saying you're being cold. You're overthinking." And if you hold your boundary, they will often withdraw again. That withdrawal is the proof. Because if someone disappears when you asked for clarity, they did not come back for intimacy, they came back for control. Ladies and gentlemen, the viewer also needs to understand the difference between intensity and change. Some avoidants, when they sense you're not easily accessible anymore, will become intense. They'll send emotional messages. They'll love bomb. They'll promise the world. They'll say, "I've changed. I can't lose you. You're the one." And that intensity can feel like proof. But intensity is often anxiety. It is panic at the idea of losing access. Real change looks quieter. Real change looks consistent. Real change looks like follow-through over time, not fireworks in one night. So the final protection is this: don't fall in love with the return. Fall in love with the pattern. If they truly regret losing you, they will not only message you, they will show up differently. They will respect pacing. They will respect your boundaries. They will accept that trust must be rebuilt. They will not rush you into comfort so they can relax again. They will understand that you are not a resource to soothe them. You are a person who deserves stability. And if they can't do that, you don't need revenge. You don't need to prove anything. You simply refuse to participate. You can say, "I wish you well, but I'm not available for this dynamic." That is the real endgame, not making them chase, but making yourself unreachable to anything that harms your peace. Because the deepest flex in any avoidant story is not that they came back. It's that you didn't lose yourself when they did.